Alright, we got a late night stream tonight. So we'll try to make this one pretty quick. I'll stay pretty focused. So we're gonna be working on our APIs for channel management. So creating channels, joining and leaving channels at the very least, and then listing channels and listing the channels that you're joined to. There's some others like archiving channels and stuff like that we may get to. But I may also just finish that off stream. Because by the time we do 2 or 3 of these, we'll have the idea. All right, so let me go ahead and make my pull request real quick. All right, the other thing I went ahead and did earlier today was we had talked about splitting our web server away from the Express app so that the app isn't listening on port 3000 and is instead listening on web ports. So what I've done is created a self-signed SSL cert and have configured all of that so that now bin/www is how we start the backend. And you can see here it brings in our Express app and just wraps it in an HTTPS server. So you can kind of poke through here to see how all that ends up getting laid out. And the only thing we did inside the Express app was instead of listening here, we just export the app so that it can be brought inside the bin.www file. Eventually, so this is self-signed. So if we look at WAC, we'll see like a insecure warning or whatever. That's going to be fine for local development. What I want to play with is we'll set up Let's Encrypt once I actually get this hosted somewhere. I think I'm going to head and bought whack.chat just for giggles. So we may actually have this set up so that GitHub's deploying to a production place at some point, and then it's just going to be chaos inside of there. But anyway, so tonight we're going to go through these things, set up our channel API. The first thing I kind of wanted to talk about was a little bit of the kind of RESTful conventions we're going to follow. So you can go Google what is a REST API, and there is not really any consensus on what that really means. So it's one of those things where like you say, I'm going to go make me an API, a REST API, and then the first person you talk to is like, oh no, that's not a REST API. This is a REST API. So it's one of those things where like, we're going to go through the rules and the conventions that WAC is going to use. And I've done similar in other projects, but at the same time, don't take any of this, as the source of truth or whatever. It's something that's worked for me. So anyway, we're going to organize our API around, we'll start off with 2 concepts. There's going to be the resource. So that could be anything from like a user or a channel or a message, or think about your nouns inside your API. So we're going to have resources, and then we're going to have resource collections. So let me open up a little Scratch file. So this doesn't matter. This says Markdown. So imagine you have like API slash channels as this will be our resource collection. So if that's the collection, then I can send a GET request to API slash channels, and I'll get back a list of all channels. However, if I wanted a singular channel, I could say API channels and then an ID. So this ID, you know, it could be the primary key in your channels table. This could be some other surrogate key, so it could be a random string of characters. And if you've ever used Slack, you'll know like getting your channel ID, it is a random string of characters, random string of characters. So that's what they decided to do, and I doubt that is their kind of primary key in whatever database system they're using. So this will be list all channels, and this is, you know, instance wide or whatever. This isn't the list of channels that I'm in. So this is basically if you were going to browse to join a new channel, this is the endpoint you'd use. So this shows a specific channel by ID. What I like to do to kind of reference or point at like my channels or whatever is I'll make a me endpoint. So I may start with this and say shows information about the current authenticated user. So this may be a useful, or this will be a useful endpoint to have in the API anyway, because think about the front end needs to get information about the current user. It would send this and get it back, and we might show like this information in the avatar or, you know, whatever. But we could have sub resources hung off of this one. So like the API slash me endpoint is kind of a special one, but you could imagine like we've got resources here. This is a specific resource. Well, this channel may have related resources, and the way we kind of represent that is through use of sub resources. So it's basically just the idea of tacking something else onto the end of it. So an example of that, if I wanted to say get all the messages in a specific channel, then I might use this to list all messages in channel in a specific channel. And if I wanted to get, you know, all the users inside of a channel or members, whatever we end up calling it, you could say members, or maybe it's who, or whatever you want to call it. And that's something else I guess we don't need to get too in depth with right now, but your API does not necessarily reflect your models and how you model the domain. It doesn't reflect your database tables. So we may have we have a users table currently, but I may in the API call them members, or I may call it who, because that would be like the command you would type in the channel to list who's in the channel. But either way, you get like a, say, URI, general URI structure is something like resource in ID, sub resource. Now you could kind of take this, you know, further and be like, okay, I want to get a specific sub resource, and then I'm going to have another you know, nested sub resource and a specific one or whatever. Myself, when I'm designing APIs, I set kind of a hard rule to I never allow indexing into a sub resource collection. So this is going to be pointed. Imagine like you've got code for this resource is going to be up at the root. The sub resource will be up at the root somewhere. So we're going to have maybe a generic users endpoint or something like that, but a channel may have users sub resource as well. So rather than indexing into it here, if I knew I needed a specific user or specific sub resource, then I would just reference it by its normal URI, and not make this chain, all the way to whatever. Part of this is tactical, part of it is strategic. So the tactical part of it is, if I do support nesting, then in my Open API spec, I have to add endpoints, explicit endpoints for every single one of those. There isn't like a, just figure it out spec type thing. But the strategic part of it is just having, a clean public API, a clean REST API that's intuitive and obvious to use, so that people aren't spending 90% of the time in your documentation trying to figure out what the fuck's going on. So we'll say these are examples of possible sub-resources, but we're not going to work on these tonight. Tell you what, for funsies, I'll put little stars next to what we're going to work on today. So if I wanted to get a list of channels that I've joined, then I could imagine having a sub resource hung off of this me resource, and that would be the list of channels the current user is in. So this endpoint's use are important because, remember Slack's got your list of channels on the left. We're going to need a way of querying that. So this will be your import for this. Now, you could also do things like maybe I side load this list of channels and it's just part of the API me resource. And that's totally legit too. In fact, when we get around to doing this, maybe we decide to go that route just because it's simpler. The issue there is if you're in like 32,000 channels, one, your phone is going to explode from all the notifications and @heres and @channels. But let's say you were in that, then you would need a way of paginating over that. And that's kind of, you can implement it, you can technically implement whatever you want, but it becomes less obvious what's going on when you look at that in regards to consistency across the API. So users are going to expect to paginate collections of resources and filter collections of resources, not filter a fragment of a resource. So filter the channels within the me resource. So this is all about like getting information. How do we create channels? So conventionally, you would use the post method for doing that. So we come down here and say post API channels is how we create a new channel. Right? So I would send a post request with a JSON body that represents a channel resource. And then in my Open API spec, we're going to have to specify all of that. Like, what does a channel look like when represented as JSON? And this is another opportunity where that JSON representation does not need to match your database table or your models. It's an abstraction for a client to more easily interact with whatever your domain is. In a lot of simple examples, and this being a simple example or CRUD app, they'll likely all match up. But in more complex domains, your APIs, your REST APIs, are very focused and purposefully simplified. So it's a lot of the time, they won't match up, and that's totally okay. I've seen a lot of developers try to get them to match up and kind of paint themselves into a corner that way. So don't feel like you have to do that. So let's think about, we got creating channels. If we wanted to archive a channel, that would be, we'd use a delete request for that. So you'd say, I want to delete a specific channel. Now, this is a good example of, maybe we don't support just straight up deleting channels because we're kind of wanting to mimic what Slack does. So in Slack, you can archive a channel and then you can delete an archive channel, or an admin can. But this is an example where you kind of have to separate. This says delete, but this is just our way of expressing the intention to archive a channel in terms of the HTTP language or whatever. So when we're saying it, we're going to say in our spec, when you send a delete request to this URI, then it archives that channel, as long as you have permissions to do that. So we can get channels, we can get a specific channel. This might be used for like if to show like the channel topic and stuff like that. When we implement that, we're not our channels today are probably just gonna have names, and that's it. Names and owners. Here's how we create them. Here's how we archive them. If we were going to allow folks to change the names of channels, then there's two HTTP verbs we could use for that. So you could say put or patch API channels ID. So this would be for updating a channel. Change the name. So typically I end up using put much more often than patch. But I'll explain how both of these kind of work. So a put request kind of expects that you're going to send a new value, or you're sending the whole representation of the channel. So if the channel has a name, an owner, and like 10 other properties, when you send that put request, you may only be changing one, but you're supposed to send the entire representation. And the idea is almost think like on a server somewhere is a JSON document that is the channel, and you're saying to the server, replace what that is with what I'm sending you. So it's a whole replacement of the resource. Patch is your way of selectively changing specific things about a resource, which at first, when you first think about it, it's like, okay, that's more intuitive, because with put, if I've got like 30 properties on that resource, I'm only changing one, isn't it inefficient to send all of them and like, do whatever? The issue with patch is that there isn't really any like standardization of what a patch looks like. So your first iteration is going to be, it'll just be a fragment of the resource. So if it requires 30, I'm going to send a JSON object, but it's only going to have the properties I want to change on it. And that's a completely natural, completely legit, if you go the patch route, way to do it. The code that leads to on the back end, you end up having to like in the controller have a bunch of ifs around like, well, if they set this, do this. If they set that, do that. If they set that, do that. When it's a CRUD app, it's not as noticeable. When there's logic around any of those values changing, it gets a little bit hard. And the code, it's not technically hard. It's more like it gets hard to maintain, I guess is the best way to put it. So we're going to be using puts more than anything. So what else is there? As far as endpoints we want to support. So anyone can join. We need to do our join and leave. Got this. Got this. Got archived. Okay. So before I do join and leave, REST is short for representational state transfer. So it's the idea that you're going to take a resource, find some way of encoding it and sending that encoded state across the wire to somewhere else. You're transferring that state to another service or whatever. So it's all about like these resources and resource collections and specific representations of them, and we're transferring them across the wire. REST is kind of opposed, or when you think of like, what's the best way to phrase it? You've got REST APIs, and then you have like RPC APIs. RPC is short for remote procedure call. And the idea is instead of working in terms of like these nouns and collections of nouns, you're sending specific actions to the back end, and then that payload includes all the information needed to be able to perform that action. So, for create channel, that might be like post API channel dot create. So these would be like basically all verbs, and wouldn't be any nesting to it at all. So it'd be like if I wanted to make a message, be message create, and then this would include like the channel ID and who's sending it and all that kind of stuff. This payload would include channel name, whatever. And you might have a read side to your API that looks more like this. Maybe. You could also have like, post API channel.get, where you have to include the ID of the channel and you get back that. So a lot of the blog posts and stuff you'll read about kind of put these two at opposite ends and say you're either a REST API or you're an RPC API, and if you try to mix them, you're wrong. And my opinion is that opinion is bullshit. You can mix them. The goal is to build an ergonomic API. So I would say pick kind of a lane. So I like going that RESTful lane because I just like the way it ends up getting organized, or the API is organized. It's somewhat discoverable, but think about like what a RESTful URI structure for joining a channel would look like. Instead of the RPC, we'll say RPC hybrid approach. The RPC hybrid approach here might be, okay, well, I'm going to post to API channels ID, and then I'll make a little like join verb sub resource on it and call join leave. And this would be my way of joining or leaving a specific channel. This is the route I would go because, but at the same time, it's like, what's the join sub-resource? What's the leave sub-resource? Is there a join collection? Is there a leave collection? The answer is there's not. But this is obvious what the hell's going on. The REST purist approach might be something like post to API channel memberships. And I would put in the, user is, or we'll say channel is general or something like that. But then when I want to delete this, when I create this, it'll get an ID. If I wanted to leave a channel, I would have to delete API channel memberships, that ID. When I look at these two, this shit feels like I've got some mental gymnastics going on. I'm like trying to shoehorn my model into this RESTful approach. And there's no reason to do that. There are no like REST police that are going to come break down the door and, put you in handcuffs or whatever. So if all else fails and you can't decide between two approaches like this in your own apps, go find your users or go find the people that are going to use your API and ask them which one feels better to you if you had to use it. And then you'll know. Because ultimately, they're going to be the ones using it. They really need to be the ones that kind of inform this API. All right. So this is basically going to end up being our API structure for tonight. Only other thing I'll mention before we jump in is I like to have a controller per resource type. So looking at this, we already know we'll have a channels controller and possibly a me controller. We may call this user controller. I don't know. There is something if you go with me, you might imagine you had a new developer come in, they're going to be like, what the fuck is the me controller? And then you have to explain it. But it is nice having that match the API structure somewhat. So that's probably what we'll do. But I've had other projects where we do this convention, but the controller's called something else. All right. So I'm actually going to, let's take all this and we'll just shove it into the pull request real quick so we have it for later to format. So notes. All right. We can close. Well, tell you what. So at this point, let's bring up stoplight and we're going to create all of these. So the first thing is we know we need to go into our API controllers. Let's make a me.js. Let's make a channels.js. And again, these basically export functions that will be the operations that are our spec point to. So let's go back to notes. We're going to need an API channels. So for us, everything's already like rooted under API, so we'll just say /channels. The other thing we can do is go ahead and change this to HTTPS whack.chat. So if you pull this project down and want to play with it, you can just put an etc host rule in for whack.chat, and then you'll be good. And you can generate a self-signed cert. In the var directory, I put a README in here for basically just how to throw together a quick self-signed certificate. When we get Let's Encrypt wired up and all of that, I think we'll be able to automate that even for local development, which would be kind of cool and convenient. So a new endpoint. It's important to tag these because if we ever set up like documentation rendering off the spec or whatever, typically your default renderers group things by tags. So we'll say channels. We're gonna have a get request. We're gonna have a post request. So this will be list all channels, and this will be create a new channel. Something that we're not going to implement this in our API most likely, but something that is kind of convenient about this resource collection resource approach is, let's say you had like, I want to delete all channels. Well, you could send a delete request to the channel's resource collection, and that would delete them all. But you could also say, well, I only want to delete channels with this tag or something. And maybe there's a query parameter that you would pass to filter the collection down, and then send a delete request to that filtered collection, and it would delete only those channels. So that's kind of the types of things you can do. You can do like bulk updates through a resource collection interface as well. Oh, I just saw window flash. DNS mask has decided to start and is asking to allow incoming connections. There it is. We'll allow. Then stop RVM. I want to fix that at some point, but it only happens when I boot this machine. So, all right. So we'll create, and we'll go ahead and add more. So let's go into whack. So still channels, and let's set up our specific. So we're going to be able to get a specific. We'll be able to put and delete. So this will show update a specific channel. We don't need the specific. So let's say update channel, show channel, archive channel. And I'm gonna kind of nitpick myself. Any of my like proper nouns or like things that reference models, I'll capitalize them. It's probably just an OCD thing more than anything. All right, so we'll create and add more. Let's go ahead and add our join. So channels ID join. This is going to be a post. If you've seen these done as put too, it really doesn't matter. Whatever you feel, whatever you're feeling is fine. Join a channel. All right, we're not going to implement these yet. We don't need them tonight. let's go ahead and add our me. The last one we're going to do is API me channels. This we have this RPC hybrid approach. This API may actually be like a great way of joining and leaving channels. Because in this way, if you wanted to join a channel, you would post here, and you could delete here. What I don't like about that is, and that, I mean, it could be completely legit. You could have an API that worked that way. What I don't like about it is that if I look at this at first glance, this feels like the channels resource just scoped to me. So my expectation would be that if I posted to it, it's creating a new channel, not joining that channel. So, whereas this is 100% obvious what's happening. Get list of channels. The current user is a member of. All right. So here are all these. Let's go in and fix our operation IDs. So this is the get request for all channels. I like to have just an all method. You could also use index. Let's go with index. If you look at like what frameworks like Laravel do, or like Adonis, that's kind of the convention they follow. So like we'd look for resource controllers. Yeah, here. So same URL structure, or similar URL structure. This is built for like, page flipper applications. So you've got like, here's my edit form to be able to edit that page, whatever. But index, create, store. Create is like the form to create a photo. So index, store, show, update, destroy. Those are kind of the CRUD. I think Rails is done this way too, but we don't necessarily have to match that, and we won't, but just thought it worth pointing that out. Stoplight. Okay, so we'll say channels controller index method. I'm gonna come back and do descriptions later just to not eat up a bunch of time, but we do need to make sure that we configure security for all of these. And we'll come back. I'm gonna go do a pass through, and then we'll come back and do the responses and all that. We just want to have all of these operation IDs mapped correctly so that we can actually start the server. We have to also create all these like stubbed controller methods. So this will be channels dot create. This is channels dot show. I think there is a way. Well, I'm not going to get distracted. There might be a way to like set defaults or something. But we'll come back to that later. So this will be channels.update. This is one, instead of calling it destroy, we'll say channels.archive. We may have a destroy at some point, but not right now. All right. This one is one that doesn't map to anything. So you just have channels.join. There isn't like a CRUD operation for that. And that's by nature of we've got, this RPC hybrid stuff going on. Another way I've seen this done, instead of pointing these to two separate methods, you could have like a channels.rpc controller method, and you would send everything to that, and that function would basically rip the sub resource off to know what action it was performing and then map that to the correct code. So inside of here, you'd also have like a little router or something, but we're going to keep it simple. Me.show. Me.channels. We got to do the security. Forgot to do that over here. Yep. All right, let's poke through. All right, all that's wired up. So let's pop back over to our controllers. And we need to export index. We'll just have it send an empty object, and then we'll make a few more of these. So we'll say show, create, update, archive, join, leave. Yeah. And then here we'll have show and channels. And it's probably a good idea to come in here and add some documentation inside your code as well. You're going to have it here, but this is something once you get it set up, you'll touch it less and less and less. It'll be like new features where you'll be like, okay, we're going to add a new property to the channel. Okay, I got to write my migration. I got to update my spec. I got to update the controllers, da 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 da. Most of the time, you're going to just spend your time in here. But I'll do that off stream because it's just going to be a lot of busy work. But it is something I do want to come in here and document just for future self and anybody who wants to contribute. Okay, so now let's see if we can start the server. We still got to come through here and specify all of these responses, and the request bodies, but we need to make sure this runs at this point before we get too deep. Okay, so we've got some errors. Just complaining about a response. We have to have responses, so let's just slime that for now. Say, yeah, it has a response. Has a response. 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 Let's try to restart. All right, so it is running now. So what I'm gonna do we'll probably start with creating a channel and then we'll start with reading a channel, like the channels collection, and then we can expand out from there. I don't know how that got created. It must have got trigger happy clicking. Okay, so get. All right, so when we come in, we can specify the response structure. We can also specify any query parameters that you're allowed to pass to this resource collection. That is the query parameters is totally something we're going to do in the future. We have to be able to support paginated collections and other kind of filters, like filtering messages, like you want to find all messages since the last one you saw and stuff like that, or since some time, because you're going to have orders of magnitude more messages than users and channels. But to start off, we're not going to paginate anything. We're just going to drop the full collections just to get code out there, and then we'll have a stream where we just paginate the things. So for right now, we don't have any query parameters, but we are going to have a response on this collection. So if you add body, I don't think, can I make this bigger? Can't. Wait, stoplight. I hit command. Oh, I have to hold shift. I'll make this a little bit bigger just to make sure it shows up well in the video. But when you're using stoplight, you can come in here, you add a body, you have to specify the type. Most of the time for JSON APIs, or REST APIs, it's going to be JSON. But if you ever have a response that like you can ask for the same thing as text, or I do this for BPMN processes. So like a business process or whatever, it'll have a JSON representation that might have like stats about the process running or the process definition, but the actual definition is in this custom extended XML format called BPMN. But anyway, so we're working with JSON, and then our schema's down here, so we say it's an object. But this is going to end up being an array of objects. So I have to come in here and say, okay, it's an array of object. And now I can say, well, it has a name, a string. And then this is required. So it may also have an ID, and that's required. And that's probably that's like the minimum we would do. Internally, our channel model and table is going to track the current owner of the channel. We'll probably implement that, but just adding a field to the table rather than like some other kind of connected, robust permission system, which we may grow into, but we're not going to start with that. But think about it like this. Just because I have an owner in the database does not mean I need to expose that to the API yet. So when you're building these things out, don't just put things in the API because there's a field in your database or because there's a field on the model that you could show. Wait for someone to ask for that, and wait for that moment to kind of have that conversation and design conversation with a team. By not doing that, so you may feel like your first intuition might feel like, okay, well, if I don't go ahead and do that, I know my users are going to use it. If I don't go ahead and do that, it's kind of annoying that they have to ask for it, right? Like it's not the best for them. That may be true, and you may make the right call, but go ahead and put it in. But what I have found in my experience is that by not automatically making those decisions for my users, it sparks a conversation on a very specific thing, very focused topic, and then there's a feedback loop there that's continually reinforced over and over and over. If I just make decisions, just throw the kitchen sink out there, I may never meet a user that had a need at all, and we may never talk at all. Anyway, so we've got our array of objects. This would work, but you think about like, okay, well now I've got to create one. Well, to create one, you're going to have a name is required. So you could kind of imagine this playing out where now if I wanted to change a property name, I've got to change it in everywhere this shows up. Or we end up in a scenario where a channel inside of the channels collection could look different than the specific channel, or a specific channel might have additional properties that aren't in the collection. Which for our API, we don't want to do. We want everything to be consistent. For other APIs, maybe you do want to do that. I don't know. But anyway, Stoplight has this concept of a model that would kind of be the answer to that. So we'd make a channel model that would include this schema, and then this response would be an array of channel models. Under the hood, these are just additional schemas in the OpenAPI spec. So if we come in here and say, I'm going to make a channel model, I can say it has an ID and a name. Name is required. ID, we're going to go ahead and put it in there like everywhere we can. But if I want to use this model for the create, then ID has to be optional because you won't know the ID before. You could go down this path of, you could have like create channel as a model, and read channel or just channel is another model, where in create channel, ID isn't even in here. I'm not going to do that. So right now we'll just leave it, you know, not required. So if I come back over here, we can refactor this to, instead of being an array of object, it'd be an array of references to channel. Now this is done. So this will always be an array. So if I sent like an empty array, then I fulfill it. It just doesn't have any channels yet. So if you remember, our current controller method is returning an object for that. So let's go see what happens when we do that. So this is the endpoint we're going to be looking at. We're returning JSON object. So no zoom. I don't want to open you. So open Insomnia. Make a new folder for channel. And get all channels. So the first thing is I need to log in. Couldn't connect a server. Gotta change this to whack about chat. So we've got that, which means we should have cookies over here. We don't. So it's not, it's not saving our cookies. It's so annoying. Oh. We need to go update. We need to go update code here. Okay, so in our authentication stuff, not here. It's in API or app.js maybe. Oh, it's in our auth controller. We hard coded this. So we'll just say whack.chat for now. This needs to be a configuration variable, most likely. But it's not. And it won't be tonight. So let's come back over here and look at our cookie again. Now it's for whack chat. We'll get rid of this one. So now this should, yeah. So it's not showing up here, but it must have sent it. If we're getting this, it says response should be an array. So let's fix that. This is a little like overplayed, like, oh, let's make this change and then we'll go fix it. But I do think it's worth showing some of this workflow because for me, it's been very beneficial to kind of be it. Oh, I gotta charge my headphones. It's been really beneficial for me to have a separation between like API design and implementation. I gotta grab my charging cord real quick, and then we'll pick right back up. This is going to look really silly. All right, we're just going to speed it up. Apparently when I plug in the these QC35s, I don't get audio anymore, so I can't charge them and listen and all that at the same time. So, all right, so we're just gonna speed up a little bit. Anyway, like I said, there's been real benefit in being able to separate API design from implementation and like switching gears in that way. So that's why I kind of harp on it a little bit. But so when we list our collection, it'll be an array of things. We've changed that implementation to an array. So now if I come back to Insomnia, send it again, I'll get an empty array and everything's fine. So we could come through here and be like, okay, well, this is the post request to create a resource. So that's going to require a resource body or a request body. And I could come through here and set all that up by hand, or it's just a reference to a channel. So when you create it, you send that same structure as what's in the response. Semantically, when we create a resource, we always return the current representation of that resource. So that's basically just going to be the channel. So this will be a JSON object. So now that one's done. Getting a specific channel ID, the response, it's just the channel again. Putting is just like our post request. So this is going to be a reference to channel. And we're going to return the latest representation, which will be basically what we just sent. Delete, you don't have to send a response body at all for deletion. You can. I don't think we will. These medium points, I'm gonna kick this to another stream. I think just because I think we're gonna run out of time, or my headphones are gonna run out of time. But we would basically create like a user model, and then this would return that model. But actually, we can do this one. This is going to return an array of channels. So it's basically just like our channel resource collection. This might be just username and ID maybe. All right, so let's go to our list of channels. And we're going to end up making a channel model. And I'm just going to rip this and change some things. So a channel I know is going to have a name to begin with. It may have an owner, but I don't know if I want to pass this in via the constructor or have like a static method, or I don't know what. Because I don't know that I want to show this in the API yet. Turn new channel. Attributes.name. There's certainly going to be other properties. I'd say this.id equals null for now. Something else I kind of want to play around with is internal to our database. We're going to use, regular old like auto incrementing integer IDs for building relationships between tables and all of that. When we expose that to the API, though, I don't want those IDs in the URLs. So every resource is likely going to have an alternate unique ID. But it's not going to be a UUID specifically. Let's just call it UID for now. Or I also thought about like resource ID. Maybe even like spell that out. So resource ID. But let's go with RID. We'll stick with that for now. All right. So if I have this channel here, I could, or this resource collection, I could kind of new up a few of these. First thing is I need to import that. Say general, random. Let's see what this looks like. This should basically your ES6 classes are just fancy objects, so it'll deserialize all the whatchamacallits, the properties on the object, or it'll serialize those to JSON when it renders it. So let's just set these. We'll hard code these. This will be like some a something like that. Resource ID should be string. Resource response ID should be string. It is a string. Oh wait, no, it's not. See that though? Like it's interesting because that's like when you write the spec, it almost drives out the implementation. So because that wasn't a string, it was kind of complaining. The fact of it is we're never going to show that number in the resource collection. We're only going to show this. So like the RID ID on the model is going to be a completely internal detail. RID on the model will be presented as ID. So how do we do that? The way we do that is to create a toJSON method on our ES6 classes. And this method's job is to return the JSON representation of the object. So here we return kind of basically the spec for a channel. So the spec for a channel says it's a string-based ID. So ID is this.rid internally. And then a name field is this.name. So you think about it like up here we do whatever we need to do to model the concept of a channel and its relationships to other models. Here is the implementation or the fulfillment of that open API spec. So that's a neat way to think about it. Now, like owner was showing up here just because of the property, but here we're explicitly not including that. So now we're good. All right. So there's our fake, resource collection or whatever. Let's show an individual. So this would be like, for right now, I'll just slime it, and we can get this added in. So duplicate, show specific channel. We'll say, let's all right, so there's ID, name, general, and we just keep on going and going and going. So at this point, let's swap over to creating. So the first thing is we're going to need to make a migration. So connects migrate, make, create channels table. String rid table so you want to think about like all the different, actually let's not we're not gonna overgeneralize at this point. Right now we're not supporting filters, so we're not even going to think about how different fields should be indexed in our database to speed that up. We know that we're going to look for RIDs through the URL, so those at least need to be indexed. So we'll add, and they also need to be unique, so we'll add that. Owner. So this should be a pointer to the users table. So say user ID. And I don't remember how to do foreign keys with connects. I always have to look this up. Sheet. I think you can even chain it off of here, but we'll just put it down here. User ID, references, users.id. So any of these foreign key relationships will always point to our auto incrementing IDs on the tables. Okay. This should be owner. Just like that. Owner.id. Maybe. Stick with owner. We'll go ahead and do ID. Just to like, this will make it obvious, oh, yeah, it's a foreign key over to some other table, and you would guess, because it's an integer, oh, it's the user ID, if you were looking at the schema. So now we need to drop that, that key. Oh, I've made it too big. Wait, connect schema. I think I should just have to drop the table. I don't need to worry about the keys at all. You would have to worry about the keys if other things pointed to this table, maybe. But that's not the case here. So let's migrate up. Ooh, all kinds of errors. It's incorrectly formed. Connects. Constraint is incorrectly formed. It's probably going to be that we have to like index it ourselves or something. I wonder if, let's try it this way. Yeah, I didn't think that was the thing. I know it used to be. Yeah, 2014. Let's see if I have a local example of one. It is users, yeah, okay. It's users table. All right, so tail shadows already exist. So we need to clean that up real quick. This is pretty common whenever you're working with or writing migrations. If they ever fail, they can get into weird, inconsistent states. So yeah. Okay. So it made our channels table. Describe channels. Cool. Cool. So now let's go implement our create. So let me make this a little bit bigger. So we'll need some room. All right, so first off, let's try this static async create method is actually going to be what interacts with the database or whatever. So what we want to be able to do is say const channel equals channel.create, and then we'll pass it some attributes. So those will be pulled out of our rec body. So we'll say name equals rec.body.name. Don't say, I hate saying like absolute things like don't ever do this, but don't ever do this. The way we're writing these are like, you know, plain old ES6 classes or plain old objects or whatever. But if you ever have a framework that supports kind of mass assignment of properties, a lot of object relational mappers or ORMs will do that for you. This is a like easy way to get compromised or have your application be compromised. Always be explicit with your mapping of that request body to your model properties. It seems like overkill, and this is a lot. You know, it's one line or whatever, and it's really readable, but it's not worth it in my experience. So create the channel name. Const instance equals new channel. Let's say instance ID equals. But right now we'll say var slime ID equals 0, and this is always going to be the next slime, the next ID. And then instance rid, I got some sauce for this, so I want to pull in. Owner will be the current user. So that right there, we're going to need to pass that in to this controller or whatever. So we'll say owner is res.locals.username. This shouldn't be username, it should be the user ID. We're not currently tracking that in our token, so now we have to switch gears a little bit and go ahead and do that. So I'll say that's in the setup. We're setting it here. So locals dot UID equals payload UID. I think UID may already be a claim, but we're just going to wing it and see what's up. So now we need to get that into our payload. So to do that, we come back over here, and my headphones just died. But we're going to roll with it. So we need to go over to our auth controller. it in here. That equals user.id. Going off this, I think we just add this here. Just keep it simple. Back over here, user find and create, does user ID. Let's try to log in again. See what happens. Let's click the token, blah. So, oh. User is not defined. Up over here, call it again. User is not defined. Makes sense because we called it user record. Just need that back to user since we don't have a local variable anymore. Bump. Okay, so apparently there's an uncall exception somewhere in some library we're using. So now if I come back over here and I want to set a breakpoint in here to be able to inspect that payload, do this. Send. Now payload includes the user ID as well. So it may come back to this later and like decide, oh, I don't want to put that in the token. But for now, it's fine. What this is doing is saving us a call to the database to do a lookup based on username just to get the ID, just so we can set an owner in our channels controller. So this will be UID instead of user ID. So over here, we'll say instance owner equals attributes owner. All right, these RIDs, I found a library I want to use or play around with called Nano ID. And we're gonna try pulling that in and see what it feels like. So it's just called Nano ID, my Nano ID, and let's go their site. Not what I wanted. This one. So I just want alphanumeric. And honestly, like when I was dragging around, I'm not security conscious at all. I'm just looking at what's attractive to look at, which is the total wrong way of going about this. But I also thought this was a cool little developer experience thing to have a little slider that you could drag around and get the code. Thought that was pretty cool. All right. Okay, so up here, we're gonna need to make a utility class for this. We don't need to, but I want to. Nano ID.js. Paste that in there. And what we'll do is we'll say exports nano ID equals that. Is it going to do what we want it to do? I think so. So this might actually generate the thing though. It's not what we want. Yeah, that should do what we want. So I should be able to come down here now and just say nano ID. It's not what I wanted. I wanted it to export or to import our nano ID. All right, so when we create, it'll set the owner, it'll generate a RID, it'll increment the slime ID, and then it'll just go. So let's say channel, we'll return that. And now let's go back over to Insomnia. We need to make one of these to create a channel. So this is going to be a post request. We are going to include a body. And we'll just send the let's just say like whack dev. We'll send it. Response should have a required property name. Okay. Let's make sure we actually got what we think we're getting. So channel is a promise. We need to await our promise. And I bet that just works. Nano ID is not a function. So that's why it didn't export our thing. Response body required. So let's pop back over here. We are sending a response. Channel is undefined, so we're probably not returning it at the end of our create method. And that's all that is. So return instance. So no channel is that. RID is a function. Which is sad. this. I think the original code we had was probably what we wanted. We'll fix that up. So send. Channel is, okay, ID, owners 1, rid is that. Looks great. Continue. And then our response ID should be string. Of course it should be. It is, though. Or at least it should be. Tell you what, let's just run it again, and we will go in the debug console and see what happens. So, channels, channel, send, and then we want to JSON stringify channel. ID is a string. It's as string as it can be. So what does this think? Oh, I wonder if this is complaining about the body, not the response. If it were the body, though, let's just try it, see what happens. Yeah, so it's not that. Tell you what, let's see what we're actually getting back. So I can come into app.js and temporarily not validate responses just to see what we're seeing. Let's try just setting this to foo, maybe. I mean, it's a string. I don't know what its issue is. Unless validation is happening on the model itself before before the response, which shouldn't be the case. It should not be the case. Let's run this back on. If that ends up being the issue, we'll change our response. Yeah, okay. So we're going to change our response not to use the to.json or not to rely on that. Or actually, what if we just explicitly called it there? That'd probably fix it. So let's try that. Shouldn't have to do that though. But that does fix it. So we'll go with that for now, and I'll figure out why this isn't working. It might be a bug in Express Open API Validator that we can go track down. But this is what we want. And what I should see is that that ID is automatically incrementing, which I guess doesn't matter for us all that much because it's fake anyway, but I kind of want to see it. Yeah, so the ID is going up. And it resets every time we save the file because the process restarts. All right, so now let's actually create this in the database. So to do that, we're going to await connects channels, insert, and we're going to provide name is attributes.name, owner ID. That's what we used. And SQL. So owner ID is attributes owner. Tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and kind of shorten this up a bit. So name owner equals attributes And then we can get rid of all this stuff. Insert name, owner, rid. Rid equals that. Say. So that'll insert it. After we insert it, then we can do basically what we did before. This should be that. I need to quickly double check last insert ID. I think it does return in an array like that though. Last insert ID. Okay. So this should work. And then we could say just ID. And rid is rid. This is something you'd come in and clean some of this up as well later. Specifically the addition of these properties outside the constructor. We may come back and be like, no, we're going to go ahead and pass these in via the constructor instead of setting them outside like this inside of a static method, but it's fine. While we're in here, let's go ahead and implement functions for finding specific channels by ID and listing all channels. So to do that, we'll make a static async all, which is going to return everything, and a static async find by rid. We'll also have a find by ID, but we don't need it yet. So this will be needed whenever we do like relations between models and stuff like that. Eventually needed. Why are we even? We're not going to commit dead code. All right. So to get channels, I'll say const channels equals await connects channels. Eventually we'll allow passing some like maybe we'll pass a callback here that will be given the query builder so that the controller can appropriately filter this. But for right now, we're just going to have this return everything. So what we actually want to return is a map. So we'll map channels, and then this is going to be to we're going to have to return our channel instances. So it'll basically be, and this copy paste right here is your first signal that this needs to be cleaned up. We're going to keep on rolling for now though. So say this is channel.name, channel.id, channel.rid, channel.owner, ID. And then find by rid is basically all of this, but we'll throw a where rid is rid on it. And I guess this could be simplified a little bit. Okay. So let's actually run through this create a couple of times and make us some channels and see it go into the database. So first thing we're immediately noticing is this should be unique. But we're not going to worry about that right now. What we'll do is make a task. Channel names should be unique. But our create's working. So we have creates. Let's go do our replace the slime implementation here. So we should be able to say const channels equals channel dot all, and then we'll return channels. So now over here, get all channels should return the list of channels we see in the database. So ID should be string, ID should be string, blah, blah, blah. So this is that to.json junk again. So what we'll do is say channel to JSON. We shouldn't have to do this. Like I have another app where we don't do this and it works just fine. But there's our 3 rows in the database. So that's cool. Show, we'll say const channel equals await channel find by rid, and then this will be rec.params.id. So these rec.params, this will always map to whatever this wildcard is you put in your spec. So you can call this something else, it doesn't have to be ID, but it'll always map that OpenAPI validator will map this onto the URI when it's registering the routes. So now we just return channel to JSON. All right, so now let's go back over here and imagine we're in Insomnia. We want to grab this specific one, so we show a specific, we grab it, save or send, and there it is. We have to trust that that's actually it. So yeah, I'm looking at the rest of this. Update would be pretty straightforward to write. You're just writing a update query statement or update query over here in Connects. Let's do archive. So this won't be static. This will be just a method you can call on an instance of a channel. So the way this will work is, tell you what, the way this is going to work right now is we'll straight up just remove the row. The way it should work is we add an archived at timestamp to the table, and then set that. And then in our show, we would filter those out. So you'd be looking for things where archived at is null. So it hasn't been archived yet. So let's go ahead and make us a task for channel.archive should not delete the rows from database. It should set an archived at field on the row. But here we can just say, this will be void, so like it won't return anything. It is going to be async though. And we'll just say connects, wait, connects channels, where ID equals this.id. Delete, I think it is. Now I can come over here and be like, one, we'll just say res.send, because we're not going to send a body at all. I can say channel equals await, channel find by rid, rec.params.id, and then we'll call await channel.archive, and that'll archive it. So now I can come over here, duplicate, delete, we'll say archive channel. And we'll delete this one that we've been looking at. So delete, take the body, the body. So we'll send that. ID is not defined. This needs to be in quotes. If you ever get error messages like this, and you've seen me do this a couple of times, you can check. It's usually going to be uncall, but you can check call, uncall, and hit it again, and it'll point you exactly where that is. Because otherwise, the error message is like ID is undefined. Well, there's like 5 IDs on my screen right now, so I don't know which one it is. So now let's go look at our collection again. We should only have 2, and we do. So that's working. So the rest of this, I'm gonna cut short because it's getting late in my time zone. But the rest of this, I'll probably go ahead and knock out early tomorrow because it's just kind of mundane at this point. But I'll leave joining and leaving and the rest of our /me endpoints for tomorrow's stream, because joining and leaving, that'll be an example of one where we're going to create a model to represent the membership, I think. But that was, that's immediately like in conflict with what I said about the RPC interface in the REST URI or the REST API. But we'll talk about all that tomorrow. There's part of the reason I want to do it is just to have like, this is a example of a time where we arbitrarily decided to make it different. So we're kind of like setting it up a little bit to be this way, artificially. But at the same time, I think it'll also be useful. It'll create a nice internal API for us to work with that doesn't have us like creating, the typical active record style, like a user has many channels or has many, or like a channel belongs to a user, and that's through this owner relationship or whatever. And we're creating all these methods that we're never really going to use. So anyway, we'll talk about it more tomorrow. But we actually got a good bit done here. We've got our controller set up. We're all stubbed out. We've implemented some basic channel management. So yeah, tomorrow we'll finish up what we started here. The stream after that, we'll actually get into sending, and it'd be more our messages API. I think, let's see, this is done. After that, I think we're getting close to kind of an odds and ends stream, where we just, some of these tasks that we're kind of throwing on as we're working, we'll spend some time kind of culling those down, so they're not clogging kind of the core value stream we're trying to provide. So that's whenever we make decisions like this and we throw a task in here, it's like a minor form of technical debt. And this is another one example of kind of artificially putting this in the stream in a way. Maybe unintentionally, but it's a good example of you can make decisions in the moment focused on whatever the core feature is and what you're supposed to be delivering. But at some point you do need to pay that down, and it needs to be just as important as feature work. So we're going to pause for a minute. As fun as it be to keep on trucking, we need to pause for a bit and handle some of these technical debts that we've been, taking out loans on. So anyway, I think that's gonna be the end of the stream. I'm gonna wrap up the pull request we created, throw some extra notes in there, get everything committed and pushed up, and then we'll be good tomorrow. We'll be good to go for tomorrow. Anyway, I will see you all tomorrow.